The wind rolled across the red desert like a restless spirit, carrying dust, whispers, and the faint smell of rain that never came. The sun was lowering behind the jagged mesas, turning the land into a field of fire and shadows. In that fading light, a woman stumbled through the canyon, her dress torn, her hands bleeding from climbing the rocks, her breath sharp with fear and defiance. She had escaped death once today, but she could feel it following her now, silent, patient. And on horseback, she stopped beside a dead juniper tree, her chest heaving as she looked back over the land she had crossed. For a moment, there was only the sound of the wind against the stones. Then came the faint thud of hooves. One rider. Not a posse. Not soldiers. Just him. She pressed her back against the tree and closed her eyes for a second, trying to gather what little courage she had left. The Apache warrior was coming, and she knew there was no place left to run. When she first saw him that morning, he had stood on the ridge with the sun behind him, his figure dark and motionless like a statue carved from the earth itself. He had been watching her wagon from the moment it broke down. The horses had spooked near the river crossing, and her hired guard had fallen trying to control them. She'd been alone since then, alone in Apache land, with no one to trust and nowhere to go. Still, she hadn't expected him to spare her, yet he had not attacked. He only watched. All day he followed, appearing on distant ridges like a shadow that would not fade. Now, as the sound of his horse drew closer, she felt that strange mix of fear and curiosity that had been haunting her since morning. She had heard stories about Apache warriors, their pride, their silence, their eyes that never gave away what they thought. But this one was different. He didn't look like a man consumed by hatred or greed. There was something deeper in the way he moved, as if even his violence had purpose. The horse stopped a few paces away. She turned slowly. The warrior sat tall and still in the saddle, his long hair loose in the wind, his expression unreadable. His eyes met hers, and for a moment the world around them seemed to go silent. Neither spoke. She could feel her heart beating hard in her throat. He dismounted, his boots hitting the sand softly. The rifle on his back gleamed in the last light of day. She thought of reaching for the small pistol hidden under her torn skirt, but even she knew it would be useless. He could kill her before she took a breath. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice low but steady. He didn't answer. He studied her instead, his gaze traveling from the dirt on her face to the blood on her hands. She lifted her chin, refusing to look away. "If you're going to kill me," she said, "then do it." He took a step closer, his shadow falling over her. The look in his eyes changed, not softer, but more human somehow, as if he were weighing something inside himself. "Why'd you cross here?" he asked finally, his English rough but clear. "I didn't mean to," she said. "The map was wrong. The soldier said there was a fort 2 days west." "No fort here," he said. "Only death." Her lips trembled, but she managed a bitter smile. "So you plan to give me that?" He didn't move. She could feel the tension in the air between them. Not just danger, but something deeper, older. Two people from worlds that could never meet, caught in a silence heavy with history. "I don't kill women," he said at last. "That's generous," she replied, her tone sharp. "But I've seen what your people do." That hit something inside him. His jaw tightened, and he stepped closer. "You know nothing?" "I know enough," she said, though her voice had softened. "I've buried people who never did anything to deserve this war." "And my people?" he asked quietly. "You think we wanted it? You think we asked for your forts, your soldiers, your rails through our land?" Her breath caught. For a long moment neither spoke. The sun had dropped behind the cliffs now, and the desert was turning blue with twilight. She could see the pain in his face, and for the first time she saw not an enemy, but a man who had lost as much as she had. Something stirred inside her, not pity, not fear, but a strange understanding. "What will you do with me then?" she asked, almost whispering. He looked away for a second, his gaze following the fading light on the horizon. "You can't go back," he said. "They'll kill you before you reach the river. Soldiers, bandits, it doesn't matter. This land eats the weak. I'm not weak. He looked at her again, as if testing whether she truly believed her own words. Then he said, "You will ride with me." "Until morning?" She shook her head. "I won't be your prisoner. I don't need prisoners." The way he said it sent a shiver down her spine. There was no cruelty in his tone, only quiet certainty. Still, she didn't move. She knew that if she followed him, there would be no turning back. "I don't trust you," she said. "You don't need to," he replied. He turned and walked toward his horse, expecting her to follow. She stayed where she was, her heart pounding. She thought about the burned wagons she had seen, the soldiers' graves by the road, the endless miles of desert that waited beyond this canyon. Maybe she had nothing left to lose. As he swung into the saddle, she said, "And if I refuse?" He looked down at her, the faintest trace of a smile on his lips. "Then the coyotes will take your bones before sunrise." For a long moment, she stared at him, torn between pride and survival. Then, without another word, she walked to his horse. He reached down a hand. She hesitated, then took it. His grip was strong, warm, steady, a strange comfort in the growing dark. They rode in silence for a long time. The moon rising over the cliffs, painting the land in silver light. She wanted to ask where they were going, but something in his stillness told her not to. The rhythm of the horse and the whisper of the wind became the only sounds at last. When they reached a narrow valley surrounded by boulders, he stopped. He dismounted and tied the horse. She followed slowly, her legs trembling from exhaustion. He built a small fire with practiced ease, saying nothing. When the flames caught, their light flickered over his face, revealing scars along his jaw, marks of old battles of survival. She watched him from across the fire. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. "Maybe I'm not," she frowned. "Then what are you doing?" He lifted his gaze to hers, the firelight reflecting in his eyes. "Waiting to see who you really are." Her pulse quickened. "And if you don't like what you find?" His voice was calm, almost soft. "Then I kill you." The words hung between them, cold and final. She could feel the weight of them. But instead of shrinking back, she leaned forward slightly. Her eyes locked on his. "Then kill me if you want," she said, her voice trembling with both fear and something stronger. "But kiss me first." For the first time that night, the fire cracked loud enough to break the silence. The warrior didn't move, didn't speak. His expression changed, not anger, not surprise, but something that belonged to a place neither of them understood. The wind shifted again, carrying the scent of smoke and faraway rain. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. She waited for his answer, her breath caught between life and death, knowing that whatever he chose next would change everything. And in that fragile moment beneath the desert moon, neither of them knew whether the night would end in a kiss or a killing. The fire burned low, throwing long shadows against the canyon walls. The Apache warrior sat on one side of it, silent and unmoving, his dark eyes fixed on the flames as if they held the answers to questions he didn't want to ask. On the other side, the woman sat with her arms wrapped around her knees, her back straight though she trembled inside. The echo of her words still hung between them. She hadn't meant to say them, not like that. But fear has a way of turning into defiance when there's nothing left to lose. He hadn't answered her. Not then, not after. He just looked at her for a long moment and turned his gaze back to the fire. That silence told her more than words could. She could feel the tension between them, like a rope stretched too tight. After a while, he stood and walked to his horse, pulling a leather pouch from the saddle. He tossed a piece of dried meat toward her. It landed in the sand near her boot. She hesitated, watching him. "Eat," he said quietly. She didn't move right away. Part of her wanted to refuse to keep her pride, but hunger had been clawing at her for 2 days. So she picked up the meat and chewed it slowly, never taking her eyes off him. "Do you have a name?" she asked. He didn't look at her. "Names are for those who live long enough to be remembered." She frowned. "Then what do they call you?" He was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, "Taza." The name hung in the cool air. She repeated it softly to herself, unsure if she had pronounced it right. "And you?" he asked then, his eyes shifting toward her. "My name's Claire," she said. "Claire Donovan." He nodded once. The fire popped between them. "Why were you alone?" he asked. "My father was a traitor," she said. "We were supposed to meet a supply convoy near Fort Stanton. The wagon broke down, and the men we hired ran off when they saw smoke on the horizon." Oh. She took a shaky breath. "I kept going because I thought if I reached the river I'd find help." "You found me," he said flatly. She met his eyes. "Is that what you call help?" He didn't answer, but there was a faint curve at the corner of his mouth. It wasn't a smile, not really, but it softened something in his face. She looked down at her hands. The cuts had started to close, but the dirt made them sting. The desert was quiet except for the crackle of the fire and the far-off cry of a night bird. Somewhere beyond the ridge, the faint glow of distant fires shimmered, too many for a single camp. She noticed his eyes flick toward them, his jaw tightening. "Are they yours?" she asked. "No," he said. "Soldiers." Her stomach turned cold. "Are they following you?" He glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "They follow anyone who walks free." He went quiet again, and she didn't press him. But as the night deepened, she could feel the weight of unspoken things between them. When she finally laid down near the fire, she couldn't sleep. Every sound, the crack of branches, the shifting of the horse, made her heart leap. Taza sat with his back against a rock, eyes half closed, still as stone. She wondered if he ever slept. Before dawn, he stirred. "We ride soon," he said. She pushed herself up, her body stiff. "Where are we going?" "To my people," he said. "You'll be safer there." She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Among the Apache? His gaze hardened. Better to face those who fight for their land than those who destroy it. She wanted to argue, but there was something in his voice that silenced her. She realized he wasn't trying to threaten her. He was warning her, as they rode through the narrow valleys. The first light of morning spilled over the cliffs. The air smelled of sage and dust. She followed him closely, her horse stumbling over the loose stones. He didn't speak, but now and then he slowed to make sure she was still behind him. Hours passed before they stopped near a dry creek bed. Taza crouched beside the ground, his fingers brushing the sand. "Tracks," he said. "Cavalry." She leaned forward in her saddle, trying to see. "How many?" "Too many." Her pulse quickened. "Are they after me?" He looked up at her. "They don't know you're alive. Then why follow?" "They think I took something from them." Her eyes widened. "Did you?" He straightened slowly. "They took everything first." She didn't ask what he meant. His voice had changed deeper, rougher, carrying something too painful to touch. She watched him walk to his horse, the early light catching the scars on his arm. She realized then that every mark on him had a story, and most of them were written by war. As the day grew hotter, they kept moving west. The land stretched endlessly, a mix of red rock and dry riverbeds. She wanted to ask more about his people, but she didn't know where to start. Instead, she watched him the way he read the land. How he could tell where water hid beneath stone or where danger waited in silence. At one point, she asked softly, "Why didn't you leave me to die?" He didn't look back. "Because death doesn't need my help." She thought about that for a long time. By midday, they reached a small patch of cottonwoods near a shallow spring. Taza stopped to let the horses drink. Claire climbed down, her legs aching. As she knelt beside the water, she caught her reflection, sunburned, hollow-eyed, and tired. She barely recognized herself. "You were not made for this land," he said quietly. She looked up at him. "No one is. It breaks everyone sooner or later." He studied her for a moment. "You speak like someone who's seen loss." "I buried my mother in Kansas," she said. "My father never forgave me for leaving home. When he died, I thought maybe I could start again. But every place I go just feels like another battlefield." Taza nodded slowly. "Maybe the land knows who belongs and who doesn't." She smiled faintly. And what does it say about me? He looked at her, his gaze steady. That you fight too hard to die easy. Something in his tone made her heart catch. Before she could answer, he turned away, scanning the horizon. His hand went to his rifle. What is it? She whispered. He didn't reply. A moment later she heard it, the distant drumming of hooves. The sound grew louder, echoing through the valley. Soldiers. She asked. Not soldiers, he said grimly. Raiders. She froze. What do we do? He mounted his horse in one swift motion. We ride north. Stay close. They took off across the flats, the wind cutting through their clothes. Behind them, the sound of riders grew sharper. She looked back once and saw dust rising, a band of men, armed and fast. Panic clawed at her chest. Tada turned sharply toward a ravine. They plunged down into it, the horses slipping on loose stone. The walls closed in around them. She could hear her own breath rasping. The noise of pursuit faded for a moment, swallowed by the twists of the canyon. Finally, he slowed, listening. Only silence. He dismounted and helped her down. We stop here. She looked around at the narrow canyon. They'll find us, he said. But not before nightfall. She leaned against a rock, shaking. He crouched nearby, watching the trail they had taken. His calm unnerved her. Do you ever get afraid? She asked. He didn't answer at first. Then he said, Fear is a shadow. You can't fight it. You walk with it. His words lingered in her mind. She sat down, exhaustion pressing heavy on her limbs. He built a small fire again, hidden behind a rock so the light wouldn't carry, as night crept in. She watched him across the dim glow. The more she learned about him, the less she understood. He carried himself with the quiet of a man who had seen too much, yet still chose to stand. You said we're going to your people, she said. Where are they now? His gaze darkened. Scattered. Some to the mountains, some taken by the soldiers. And you? I stayed behind to protect what's left. She hesitated. And that's why they're hunting you? He nodded once. They want the land, and I'm the reminder that it still has a voice. For a long time, they didn't speak. The desert night was alive with faint sounds, the call of owls, the hiss of wind through stone. She wanted to tell him she was sorry, but she knew words would mean nothing. When she finally closed her eyes, she could still feel his presence near her, solid, watchful, unyielding. By dawn, the air had grown colder. He woke her with a hand on her shoulder. We moved before the sun, she nodded, rising slowly. Her body ached, but her spirit had shifted. She didn't know what waited ahead, his people, the soldiers, or the promise of another fight. But for the first time in days, she felt something she hadn't before. It wasn't safety. It wasn't peace. It was the strange certainty that her path, no matter how dangerous, was now tied to his. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the fear and the dust and the silence of the desert, she knew that one way or another, Taz's world and hers were about to collide. They rode through the half-light of dawn, the pale sun lifting over the horizon like a slow-burning ember. The desert stretched endlessly ahead, empty and wild. Claire's body ached with each mile, but she said nothing. The air carried the cool promise of morning, yet beneath it was a stillness that felt heavy, as though the land itself was holding its breath. Taza rode a few paces ahead, his figure straight and silent against the rising sun. She followed, wondering if he had any plan at all, or if he was simply leading them deeper into nowhere. After some time, he slowed and turned toward a cluster of cliffs shaped by wind and time. We stop here, he said. There's a cave ahead. We'll rest and watch the trail. Claire dismounted, her legs trembling as she hit the ground. She looked around, scanning the ridges. Do you think they're still following us? Taza crouched near the sand, tracing his fingers over faint prints. They haven't turned back, he said. They'll come when the heat rises. She shivered despite the warmth. Who are they? Outlaws, he said. Some white, some Mexican, some Apache gone bad. They sell what they steal: guns, horses, women. Her throat went dry. And the soldiers don't stop them? The soldiers only stop what threatens them, he said, his voice low. Sometimes the raiders work for them. She looked at him sharply. You're saying the army, I'm saying your world and mine are not so different, he cut in. Both have men who take what they want. His words stung because she knew he was right. She thought of the soldiers she'd met on the road, young faces, hardened by whiskey and war. Men who laughed at death because it was the only thing they could control. He led her to a narrow cave hidden behind a curtain of brush. Inside, the air was cool and damp. Water dripped somewhere deep within, echoing faintly. Claire sat near the entrance, grateful for the shade. Tad gathered stones to block the opening. We'll wait until night. Moving now would only get us killed. She nodded, though waiting felt unbearable. Her mind kept circling the same questions. Why had she crossed into this land? What would happen if the raiders found them? And what did she really know about the man who had saved her? After a long silence, she asked, Your people, were they near here? He paused in his work, his back still to her. Once, he said, before the soldiers burned our camps and took the rest to the reservation. What about you? He turned then, his face shadowed by the dim light. I was gone when it happened, out hunting. When I came back, the smoke was still rising. Her chest tightened. You lost everyone? He didn't answer right away. My brother, my mother, my wife. She froze, unsure what to say. The pain in his voice was quiet but deep, like an old wound that refused to close. I'm sorry, she whispered. He gave a small nod, his eyes distant. Sorry doesn't change the bones in the ground. The words hung heavy in the air. Claire turned her gaze to the canyon outside where the light had grown harsh. She tried to imagine what it must have been like to come home and find everything gone. Her own losses suddenly felt smaller, but they connected her to him in a way that frightened her. They stayed in the cave through the afternoon. Heat shimmered beyond the entrance, and now and then Taza crept outside to check the trail. When he returned the third time, his face was tense. They're close, he said. 5 riders. Maybe 6. Her heart jumped. What do we do? He slung his rifle over his shoulder. We wait until dark. If they don't find the tracks, we move north to the high ground. And if they do, he looked at her steadily. Then you'll see how fast I can kill. The way he said it made her blood run cold. There was no boast in his tone, only fact. She swallowed hard. I don't want anyone to die because of me, he shook his head. No one dies for you. They die because this land forgot how to share. Hours passed in uneasy silence. Claire dozed lightly, waking at every noise. Once, she thought she heard voices echoing faintly from the canyon. Taza stood near the entrance, his body tense as a drawn bow. They're searching the valley, he whispered. We move now. She gathered her things quickly, following him into the fading light. They climbed through narrow ledges, moving like shadows. The sun dipped behind the cliffs, throwing the desert into long stretches of gold and purple as they reached higher ground. Claire stumbled, her foot sliding on loose stone. Taza caught her arm, steadying her. For a moment, they were close enough that she could feel his heart beat against her hand. He didn't pull away immediately, and neither did she. Then he released her and said quietly, keep low. They moved again, finding cover among the rocks. From their vantage point, they could see the riders below, dark shapes against the sand. The men searched in widening circles, shouting to one another, Do they know we're here? Claire whispered. Not yet, Taza said. But they will. One of the riders dismounted, scanning the ground near the creek bed. He pointed, and the others gathered around him. Claire's stomach clenched. They had found the tracks. Tad crouched beside her. We go north, he said. Through the ridge. If they follow, we make our stand there. They hurried through the rocks, the sound of hooves echoing behind them. The chase began again, fierce and fast. Claire's lungs burned as they climbed the rough slope. Ahead, the sky was streaked with red, the color of fire and blood. Taza stopped near a narrow cut in the ridge. Here, he said. The path splits. You'll take the high trail. She stared at him. What about you? I'll draw them away. No, she said quickly. You'll get killed." He looked at her with a calm she couldn't understand. "I've been close to death before. It knows my face." "Then let me help you." He shook his head. "You'd only slow me down." Her anger flared, hot and helpless. "You don't get to decide that." He turned, gripping her shoulder. "You want to live, Claire? Then do as I say." The sound of approaching riders cut through their argument. He let her go and climbed down toward the lower path, disappearing into the shadows. She pressed herself against the rocks, heart pounding. Below, she saw him take cover behind a fallen tree, his rifle steady. The riders appeared moments later, their shouts echoing off the canyon walls. Claire could see their faces, now hard, hungry men. The kind who enjoyed the hunt more than the kill. The first shot cracked through the air. One of the raiders fell from his horse. The rest scattered for cover, firing wildly. Smoke rose in thin curls from the rifles. Claire's breath caught as she watched Taza move with deadly precision, calm and quick. But there were too many of them. She could see one circling behind his position. Without thinking, she grabbed a loose rock and hurled it down the slope. It struck the man's horse, making it rear. He shouted, giving away his position. Taza turned, fired once, and the man dropped. The rest pulled back, regrouping near the base of the ridge. Claire could hear their voices, angry, frustrated. One shouted something about waiting for night. Taza climbed back up toward her, his expression unreadable. "They'll return when it's dark," he said. "We have to keep moving." "But you're hurt," she said, seeing the blood on his sleeve. "It's nothing." She tore a strip from her skirt and pressed it to the wound. He didn't stop her this time. As she worked, their eyes met in the dim light. The air between them felt charged again, the same quiet pull that had haunted her since the night by the fire. "Why are you doing this?" she asked softly. "You could have left me." He looked away, his voice rough. "Because once someone left me, I won't do the same." She didn't ask who. She didn't need to. When night fell, they kept climbing, guided only by starlight. The desert below shimmered faintly, alive with danger. Claire's legs shook, but she pushed on. Behind them, she could still hear faint echoes of the men they'd escaped, as the wind picked up. Carrying the smell of rain and smoke, she realized their journey was far from over. Whatever Taza was running from Mand, whatever she was running toward, their paths were now one, yet somewhere in the darkness. Beyond the reach of their small firelight, the raiders were not the only ones closing in. Something larger was moving through the land soldiers. Vengeance. Fate itself. And Claire knew that the desert would soon demand its price. One neither of them was ready to pay. The storm began to gather before dawn. Rolling in from the south with low thunder that rumbled through the desert like a warning, the wind carried sand that stung the skin and blurred the horizon into shifting waves of color. Claire rode close behind Taza, her face wrapped in a scarf. Her heart beating fast with the sense that something was coming, not just the storm, but something worse. They had been riding for hours, weaving through narrow canyons and dry riverbeds, always watching the ridges behind them. The raiders hadn't given up the chase, and neither had the soldiers. Somewhere out there, both groups were closing in, drawn by something that felt like destiny. Taza slowed his horse and looked toward the darkening sky. "The wind will hide our trail," he said, "but it will make travel harder." Claire glanced back. "Will they follow through the storm?" He nodded. "They'll risk anything if they think there's a prize waiting." She frowned. "And what is the prize?" He didn't answer. The silence between them felt heavier than the air. As they pressed on, the storm broke in full force. The wind howled through the rocks, tearing branches from the few trees that clung to the cliffs. Lightning split the sky in bright flashes, revealing the wild, broken landscape around them. Claire could barely see more than a few feet ahead. Her horse stumbled once, nearly throwing her, but Taza was there instantly, gripping the reins and steadying her. "We take shelter," he shouted over the wind. "There's a canyon ahead." They rode hard, pushing through sheets of rain that fell like knives. The ground turned slick beneath the horse's hooves. Claire's hands were numb from gripping the saddle, her hair soaked and plastered against her face. When they finally reached the canyon, Taza led them into a narrow cleft between two massive stones. Inside, the roar of the storm faded to a dull echo. He tied the horses and helped her down. She leaned against the wall, shivering. "How long will it last?" "Until it decides to stop," he said, his tone calm but watchful. He built a small fire from the dry kindling he carried, wrapped in hides. The flames flickered weakly, fighting against the damp air. Claire sat close to the warmth, her eyes following the lines of water running down the stone walls. She felt small, fragile, and yet strangely alive. Taza sat across from her, silent as ever. The light from the fire threw moving shadows across his face. She watched him as he cleaned the rifle, checking each part with steady hands. His focus was so complete that it unsettled her. "What happens when the storm ends?" she asked quietly. He looked up. "Then we face what's coming." She hesitated. "You said we were going to your people. Are they near?" He shook his head. "Not anymore. The ones who survived moved north into the mountains. The army calls it a camp. My people call it a prison." Her voice softened. "And you want to free them?" He didn't speak for a long time. Finally, he said, "I want them to remember they were once free." The firelight danced in his eyes, and for a moment she saw the man behind the warrior, the grief, the fury, the quiet strength that refused to die. She felt drawn to it, to him even as fear coiled in her chest. Before she could speak again, a sound broke through the storm, faint but unmistakable. Taza's head snapped toward the canyon mouth. He doused the fire instantly, plunging them into darkness. Claire's heart pounded. "They found us," he whispered. "How?" She breathed. "The storm hides the trail, but carries the scent." He moved closer to the entrance, peering into the rain. Claire followed, every muscle in her body tense. Through the sheets of water, she saw vague shapes, riders, 6 or 7, their torches flickering in the wind. Taz motioned for silence. He lifted his rifle, his movements slow and precise. Claire could hear the distant shouts of men muffled by thunder. The raiders were searching, calling out to each other, their voices echoing off the cliffs. For a moment it seemed they might pass by. But then one of the torches moved closer, the light swinging toward the crevice where they hid. Taza raised his weapon, ready to fire, when Claire caught his arm. "Wait," she whispered. "If you shoot, the others will hear." He met her eyes in the darkness. The tension between them was like a wire pulled tight. Then, with a slow breath, he lowered the rifle. The riders passed within yards of the canyon mouth. Claire held her breath, her hand pressed against the cold stone. She could hear their voices clearer now. Rough laughter, curses, and mixed tongues. One man said something about the woman and the Apache who took her. Her stomach turned. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the sounds faded into the storm. Only when the last torch disappeared did Taza move again. "We go now," he said. "But the rain better to drown than burn," he said quietly. They rode again through mud and darkness. The storm began to fade as the night deepened, leaving behind a wet silence that felt almost sacred. The moon broke through the clouds in pale flashes, lighting the flooded plains below. By dawn, they reached the edge of the high mesa. From there, they could see the land stretch endlessly north, the kind of emptiness that both promised escape and warned of death. Taza stopped his horse, scanning the distance. "There," he said, pointing toward a line of dark trees. "The army post. If we can reach the ridge beyond it, we'll be safe." Claire frowned. "You want to go near the soldiers?" "They'll shoot you," he smiled faintly. "Not if they think you're with them." She stared at him. "What do you mean?" "You'll ride in first. Say you escaped the raiders. They'll believe you. While they help you, I'll cross behind the ridge." "No," she said instantly. "I'm not leaving you." "You have to," he said firmly. "If they catch us together, they'll hang me and send you home in chains of guilt. Then I'll take my chances." His jaw tightened. "This isn't about chances. It's about survival." Her voice trembled, but she met his eyes. "Then we survive together." He looked at her for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. A silent argument neither could win. Then, from below the mesa, came the echo of gunfire. Both turned sharply. Dust rose in the distance. "Soldiers," Taza said. "They've found the raiders." Claire felt her stomach twist. "Then they'll find us too." He looked toward the smoke rising over the valley. "No, they'll find each other first." As the day grew hotter, the sound of battle carried across the plains, rifle shots. Distant shouts, the metallic thunder of horses. It went on for hours, until finally the gunfire faded into an eerie silence. The wind shifted again, bringing the smell of smoke and blood. Taza dismounted and climbed a short rise to look down. Claire followed, though her legs trembled. Below, she saw what was left of the fight, scattered horses, bodies, and the black flags of burned wagons. The soldiers had won, but victory looked no different from ruin. Taz's face was unreadable as he surveyed the scene. "They'll search the land for survivors," he said. "We need to move before they come this way." They crossed the ridge under the heat of noon, every sound echoing too loudly in the still air. The land ahead was rougher, carved with dry ravines and thorny brush. Claire's hands were blistered from the rains, but she said nothing. By late afternoon, they reached a place where the land narrowed between two cliffs. The wind whispered through the stones like a living thing. Taza stopped suddenly, holding up a hand. "What is it?" she asked. He dismounted slowly. "Someone's here." Before she could react, a voice called out from the shadows. "You took something that isn't yours, Apache." Claire turned. 3 riders emerged from behind the rocks. The remaining raiders. The leader, a scar-faced man with cruel eyes, smiled when he saw her. "Well now," he said. "The lady and her guardian angel. I was hoping we'd meet again." Taza stepped forward, his rifle raised. "You should have stayed buried in the storm," the man laughed. "And missed the reward?" "No, I think I'll take you both. The army pays well for a captured Apache." The others spread out, circling them. Claire's pulse raced. She could see the glint of knives, the shifting of horses' hooves on loose rock. "Taza," she whispered. He didn't look at her. "When I tell you, ride." "No," she said. "I won't leave you. Do as I say," he repeated, his voice low but sharp. The leader lifted his gun. "Enough talk." The shot echoed off the cliffs, followed by chaos. Horses reared, dust rose, and the air filled with the sharp crack of gunfire. Taza moved like lightning, firing twice and dropping 2 men before they could react. The third swung down from his saddle, charging with a knife. Claire screamed as Taza caught the man's arm, the 2 of them struggling in the dust. She grabbed a fallen pistol and fired without thinking. The sound rang through the canyon. The man fell. Silence followed, broken only by the wind. Ta turned toward her, breathing hard. For a moment their eyes met, the kind of look that says more than words ever could. Then, behind him, a faint movement. The scar-faced leader was still alive. He raised his gun, aiming straight at Taza's back. Claire's voice caught in her throat. "Taza." He turned just as the shot fired. The sound shattered the air, echoing through the canyon. Dust swirled, the horses cried out. And for a heartbeat, the world seemed to stop. When the wind cleared, Claire was on her knees beside him, her hands trembling as she reached for him. His breath came shallow, his eyes locked on hers, far in the distance. Another sound began to rise, the faint thunder of approaching horses. The army scouts drawn by the gunfire, and as the echo faded across the dying light, Claire knew the next few moments would decide everything. Life, death, and the fragile line between the two. The sound of the gunshot hung in the air long after the echo faded. Claire pressed her hands against Taza's chest, trying to stop the blood that seeped through his shirt. Her voice trembled as she whispered his name again and again, pleading for him to stay awake. The wind carried the smell of gunpowder and dust, and somewhere far off, the approaching thunder of hooves drew closer. The soldiers were coming. Taz's eyes opened slightly, his breathing shallow but steady. "You have to go," he said weakly, his voice rough but still commanding. "I'm not leaving you," Claire said, shaking her head. tears mixed with the dirt on her face. "You saved my life, Taza. I'm not going without you." He tried to smile but winced instead. "You'll be safe if they find you alone. Tell them you were taken, that you escaped. They'll believe you." "No," she said again, more fiercely this time. "If I lie, they'll hunt you forever. If I tell the truth, maybe they'll stop." His hand found hers, weak but warm. "The truth has never stopped a war," he murmured. "Go, Claire." Before she could argue, the sound of horses grew louder. She turned and saw riders cresting the ridge, soldiers in dusty blue uniforms. Rifles raised, their shouts breaking through the dry air. Panic surged in her chest. She looked back at Taza, whose eyes had begun to close again. His strength fading fast. She tore a piece from her sleeve and pressed it to his wound, whispering, "Stay with me." Then she stood, waving her arms as the soldiers approached. "Wait!" she shouted. "Don't shoot. I'm an American." The men slowed, guns still ready. Their leader, a broad-shouldered officer with a gray mustache, rode forward. "Who are you?" he demanded. "Claire Bennett," she said breathlessly. "I was taken by raiders. He saved me." The officer's eyes shifted toward Taza. "That's an Apache," he said sharply. "Step away from him." Claire stood her ground. "He's the reason I'm alive. The raiders are dead because of him. You owe him your thanks, not your bullets." The soldiers exchanged uncertain looks. The officer dismounted, his expression torn between duty and doubt. He crouched beside Taza, examining the wound. "He won't last long without help," he muttered. "Then help him," Claire said. The man hesitated, then motioned for a medic. "Patch him up," he ordered gruffly. "We'll take them both back to camp." Relief washed through her so fast it made her knees weak. She sank beside Taza as the medic worked quickly, binding the wound and checking his pulse. His eyes flickered open again, finding hers. "You shouldn't have stayed," he whispered. She smiled through her tears. "I told you. We survived together." By the time they reached the camp, the sun was sinking behind the hills. The sky burned with deep red light, and the air smelled of rain and smoke. Soldiers moved about quietly, tending fires and caring for the wounded from the earlier battle. Claire rode close beside the wagon carrying Taza, refusing to be separated in the days that followed. She stayed near him as he healed slowly under the care of the camp doctor. The wound was bad, but not fatal. The bullet had passed clean through his shoulder, missing the heart by inches. Each day he grew stronger, though the soldiers watched him carefully. It's uncertain whether to treat him as an enemy or a hero. The officer who had first found them came by often. Speaking with Claire in low tones, he asked questions about the raid, about what had happened, about why an Apache warrior had risked his life for her. Claire told the truth as simply as she could about how he'd saved her, how he'd fought off the raiders, and how not all battles were about sides. The officer listened, though his eyes showed the weight of years of conflict. "War makes it hard to see the man behind the enemy," he said one evening. "But sometimes one act can change what people believe." When Taza was finally strong enough to walk, he stood outside the tent, looking out over the open land beyond the camp. The sunset stretched across the horizon, gold and crimson. Claire joined him quietly, her steps soft in the dust. "You should go home," he said without turning. "You've done enough." "I don't know where home is anymore," she said softly. "Everything feels different now." He looked at her then, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw a flicker of peace in his eyes. "Home isn't a place," he said. "It's what you carry with you." They stood in silence for a while, watching the wind stir the grass. The land that had once felt hostile now seemed alive, breathing around them. Claire thought of everything that had happened, the storms, the chase, the battles, the losses, and realized that survival wasn't about strength alone. It was about compassion, about choosing mercy when the world offered only revenge. A few days later, the officer approached them again. "Taza," he said, "the War Department won't be sending you north. I told them what you did. You're free to go." Taza bowed his head slightly. "Then I'll find my people." The officer nodded. "They'll need someone like you." He turned to Claire. And you, Miss Bennet, the next supply wagon leaves for the fort in the morning. You can go home." She looked at Taza. Then at the land beyond the camp, wide and endless, and still carrying the echoes of everything they had endured. "I'll ride part of the way with him," she said quietly. "Then I'll decide." The officer studied her for a moment, then simply nodded. "Safe travels, both of you." That evening, as the camp settled into quiet, Claire and Taza prepared their horses. The soldiers watched from a distance, some saluting, others simply curious. Taza's arm was bound but steady enough to ride. When he mounted, he looked back at the camp one last time, then turned toward the horizon. They rode side by side into the fading light. The wind was cool, carrying the scent of sage and wild grass. The land seemed to open before them, endless and free. After some time, Claire spoke. "When you find your people, what will you do?" He was silent for a moment before replying. "Teach them to live without fear, to remember that peace can be stronger than war." She smiled faintly. "That sounds like something worth fighting for." He glanced at her, a small smile touching his lips. "And you? What will you do when you reach the fort?" She looked ahead, her expression thoughtful. "Maybe I'll write about this, about what really happened here. People need to know the truth, that kindness isn't weakness, and courage doesn't always wear a uniform." The stars began to appear, scattered like sparks across the darkening sky. The sound of the horses' hooves was steady and rhythmic, a quiet reminder that they were still moving forward. They rode until the moon rose high, casting a pale glow across the land. When they finally stopped to rest, they sat near a small fire, the flames reflecting in their eyes. There was no need for many words. The silence between them was no longer heavy with fear or grief. It was full of understanding. Claire looked at Taza, his profile outlined against the firelight. "Do you ever regret saving me?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "No, some things are meant to happen. Maybe this was one of them." She nodded, her eyes glistening. "Then I'll be grateful for it all my life." When dawn came, the sky was painted with shades of gold and rose. They stood together at the top of a ridge, looking down at two paths that split in different directions, one leading north toward the mountains, the other east toward the fort. Taza turned to her, his expression calm but sincere. "Your road waits, and yours," she said. He reached out and took her hand. "The wind will carry our stories," he said, "even when we are far apart." She squeezed his hand gently, then let go. They both turned toward their paths, the morning light falling over them like a promise. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Taza rode north, his figure blending into the rising sun. Claire watched until he disappeared beyond the ridge, her heart full but steady. As she began her own ride eastward, she glanced back once more. The land was vast, untamed, and beautiful, a place that had tested her courage and changed everything she thought she knew about love, loyalty, and freedom. In the quiet that followed, she felt a strange peace settle over her. The storm had passed, the battles had ended, and somewhere out there, a warrior rode toward home, and though their roads had parted, she knew that some bonds, the kind forged in fire, fear, and hope, never truly break. They live on in the wind, in memory, and in the hearts of those who dare to defy what the world tells them to be.